There's often a debate, I think, around, and I think we'll come into this maybe in a bit more detail later, but around, the sort of tension between the business case and the moral case. So, we know that, the types of people that may give to organisations such as CARE or other sort of humanitarian organisations may not be doing the work, or may not sort of, and the reality is that there is a population that is still, responding to a sort of very needs-based type approach where you have a very short window of opportunity to capture their attention. That's within a wider context of where, funding for humanitarian work is decreasing. The economic situation globally is challenging, and the sort of so there are sort of business challenges which of course are going to be have to be part of the conversation, and you have to accept the business reality around that. But it is about I think those are the most challenging things. So I think most people that I have worked with at CARE are sort of, they totally get the moral imperative, but it's also, well, what are we willing in terms of funding in order to test different approaches? What are we willing to change? And, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it is often that kind of the business case, the moral case, and trying to find that balance between the two. And arguably, I don't think it needs to be one or the other, but I think that those are usually where the questions come up.
I'll give you a recent story that pains me to date. We were in the process of just trying to come up with a strategic plan for a certain organization. And part of that was just to collect all the stories of change that had happened over time, and to collect more stories around the issues that they wanted to address, and present them out there to sort of back up their rationale for what it is they wanted to do. It was very painful to sit in a meeting with funders, the initial funders that this organization had, that were also, that were not indigenous they're not from Kenya. These funders were from a European country, and to sit in there and have them throw daggers at this director and tell her straight up, that's not the story that you told me at the beginning. And this beginning that they're talking about was, let's say, 5 years prior to this. This was their first strategic planning process. And so they're putting forward their stories. And this one is saying, no, that's not the story that you sold me. That's not why I give you money. And so I'm sitting there getting confused and wondering, what do you mean that's not this? That's her story. This is an organization that is founded on a real lived experience. And somebody's telling you about the experience, and you're saying, no, that's not good enough. And so when I was insisting and saying, folks, we have to stay true to the story, we have to remain authentic. This is the story that we want to put out there. This is the narrative that they want for their organization. And having to get into this back and forth, and they had to fly in more people to come and deal with this Kenyan lady who doesn't seem to understand that this is not fundable. This story is not fundable. So you need to change. And I'll tell you, that was a very painful process that led to this organization losing, 80% of their funding, because I said to her, look, your story is too important for it to be watered down because somebody doesn't like your story.
I agree with everything that's been said, really. I've worked across 2 organizations on this subject of respectful storytelling. And so I tend to categorize the concerns, the feedback I get from organizations like in 2 categories. One is the interpersonal and the more subtle, kind of pushback, which really is about unconscious biases and microaggressions and the ways people have been used to operating in the past, and the narratives that they have been exposed to. And so it comes in the way, it gets in the way, really. And Claire made allusions to this. Chilande has also spoken about this, so it's quite clear. Now, the other category for me would be what I see as the organizational, the feedback I get from institutions and organizations that we try to influence in this space with regards to respective storytelling. One of the things that stands out for me is that sometimes organizations feel, and rightly so, that they are not sufficiently equipped to take action even when they are persuaded about the need to. And so they sometimes do not have the tools to make categorical decisions and changes, or they do not have sufficient knowledge of what to do. There's also some concern around sustainability of new practices and approaches. It's usually a very big concern for organizations. This could entail things like more mainstreaming respective storytelling, could entail more funding, right? It could entail more innovative ways of funding. It could entail new streams of funding, and it could also entail ad hoc or permanent structural changes in organizations, which some organizations are just not prepared, to confront. And this could be quite tasking and demanding for organizations. Projecting messages in a different way, in a more respectful, in a more balanced, in a more ethical way, could also earn some organizations resistance and pushback by their traditional audiences. And this is something that we oftentimes do not pay attention to. Organizations have got loyalties and alliances and audiences that, love the way that they have operated over time. And so taking up these changes could appear a little bit disruptive. And to be fair to organizations, there's a need to acknowledge the fact that they are going to have, to pass through some transitional and evolutionary processes internally, right? And not all organizations are as nimble and as, flexible, to make those hard decisions internally. So these are some of the things that I've seen, coming from an organizational, sort of perspective. And I think it's just fair that we acknowledge the fact that it's not a stroll in the park. It's not going to be very easy for organizations to take on these new approaches. The moral concerns and the business concerns, they're not mutually exclusive. So you can have both, right? You can do the right thing, and that right thing can also be very good for business. I'm happy you made allusions to that. Claire has also made allusions to that. That has oftentimes been the misconception when conversations around respectful storytelling is being had. So sometimes the questions are framed in ways that suggest that you either have one or the other, or sometimes organizations understand or perceive it in ways that appears like they have to choose one or the other, but it doesn't have to be. But I'm happy that we're all on the same page on that. The landscape of funders is also evolving to one that is more socially aware. Our audiences are evolving to one that is more socially aware. So on one hand, we're trying to keep tabs with our audiences. On one hand, we're trying to keep tabs with those who fund the programs that we carry out, right? And so these two sets of stakeholders that we serve, we happen to find ourselves in the middle. But these two sets of stakeholders have become extremely socially aware, especially at an era like this. This evolving landscape of funders need to be demonstrated to stakeholders as a justification to be more socially responsive with our communication approaches. Being ethical in our comms may not have immediate gains in terms of numbers, in terms of money, in terms of budget, but it definitely has long-term and net benefits for the image building and reputations of organizations. And this image building and reputation ultimately become assets to organizations in future when they want to get funding and in terms of their efforts to connect better with their audiences.